Today it's great to have Suze here. You're the co-founder and chief business officer at Pattern. Pattern's a really interesting company because you guys launch all these different types of products and have multiple brands, and you create things that are really high quality, and all of them are really built with the thinking in mind of like how can we improve your lifestyle in your house. And you've got some incredible awards from all different types of publications for them, built amazing business, and you become this D2C expert. So I'm excited to have you here and to get into your story.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's exciting to be here.
Awesome. So just going back to the beginning, how did your interest in being a business leader, in being entrepreneurial and building brands, how did that passion start?
Honestly, I mean, it's been like a funny journey that's very organic. And I feel like that's part of being an entrepreneur. It's probably like part of your DNA and just inherently who you are. You don't necessarily, I think, plan to do that. For me, I'm originally from Australia. And so I grew up in a single parent family. I grew up with my dad, and we lived in actually a really small little lead smelting town. So it wasn't like I set out to, move to America, build a business in New York one day. In fact, like to me, the biggest town, that was really like the big smoke, as we'd call it, was about a 4-hour drive away, and we could only go a couple of times a year. So certainly, grew up in this environment where, I really wasn't expecting to build a business. But what for me, I think, was always there was this kind of curiosity and this real drive. I always wanted to solve problems. So that was the foundation, I'd say, of just who I was as a child. And I think looking back, my dad was a very wonderful example. He had built his own small business, but importantly, he also was just encouraging me to really dream big. And he would always just say, create the reality that you want to live in. Um, and I think it really was from there that in my mind, I was like, okay, well, what do, other people think is impossible that in my mind, I'm going to say is possible. And I'm going to put some, real effort into it. And that was really the path for me in becoming an entrepreneur. It was really just like, how do I follow what excites me? How do I really tackle challenges that I really care deeply about? Um, and it's been a 15 plus year journey at this point where I moved to the US, and I knew no one, had no job, no network, a lot of unanswered questions. It was certainly very daunting, but I really trusted my instinct, and I think, just really leaned in on that determination to, build, many businesses now over the years.
hmm So when you came over here, initially, like, what did you have in mind, and then how did you evolve that into getting involved with Jin Lane Media? Because it seems like that was a really major experience that kind of opened your eyes to like what was possible in the brand world.
It definitely did. And I mean, look, it happened actually really quickly. So when I
Mhm.
moved to the States, I'd actually never been to America before. Um, which people are always like, oh my gosh, why wouldn't you at least go visit? And in my mind, I was just like, no, I'm going to jump both feet in. I grew up watching a lot of episodes of Friends on television. I was like, oh, I'm sure I'll like it. Um, but I probably sent well over 1,000 emails before I moved. It was like, I mean, very naive in some ways, but I think thank goodness for being so naive in that I was just like, I'm going to knock on many, many doors, and someone is going to like crack a door open, and then I'm going to find a way to walk through it. And I actually met my co-founder, Emmett, who I've now worked with for, 13 plus years, my entire time in New York, essentially. Uh, I had been here. I arrived on a Friday in New York, and I met him on the Monday morning. And that was all through, in some ways, luck, maybe fate, if you want to call it fate as well, in that a girl that I had emailed, who was an Australian in New York, had agreed to take a coffee meeting with me. I had made sure that that was 9 a.m. on the Monday morning, like first business hour that I could with her from moving here. And she had met him at a social event somewhere and was like, I actually know someone that I think you should meet. She texted him. A couple of hours later, I was having a coffee with him. 2 days later, we were deciding that we should work together. And now, 13 plus years later, it's happened. So Jin Lane was very much a part of, my day one in New York. I think, for those that aren't familiar with Jin Lane, really what we did was create this brand agency that specialized primarily in working with like millennial focused direct consumer brands. and launching them to market and then helping to scale them. So we'd really kind of pick these early stage entrepreneurs that had the seedlings of an idea and then would help them bring it to life in all ways. I think we were very intentional about, who we partnered with, and we, developed a pretty solid track record of identifying that potential in an entrepreneur. And so it's been really incredible and certainly shaped my journey in just having this front row seat to seeing some of these extraordinary entrepreneurs. We worked with the founders of companies like Harry's and Sweetgreen and Bonobos and Hims and Hers, and it was incredible to see them launch into market and know that we'd had a part of that, and then grow into the household names. I think one of the most kind of wow moments for me was really this brand Neuralink, which was founded by Elon Musk, where we helped to build the brand. So it was building a brain computer interface with the brand. And so that one definitely felt like we were working, on the future itself. And it's now obviously rolled out many years later in more of the day to day. So it has been pretty extraordinary to kind of look at those traits of entrepreneurs and try and say, what is it that is that spark that makes someone successful?
So what did you do specifically for Neuralink? I mean, that's amazing.
We helped build all of the initial brand. So the brand strategy, the brand voice, brand development. I think for all of our work, and it's very much agnostic of the category, we would always say, how do you make a brand feel human? And how do you have a brand that evokes emotion? And so for us, whether you're branding this, brain, computer interface, or you're branding teeth aligners or, salads, it's all the same. It's how do you create something that feels like it is multidimensional and that really feels like it is, creating with the consumer so that you can build that relationship there, because that's ultimately, if you can personify a brand, that's how you can have, I'd say really long-term success in the market.
Definitely makes sense. So how did the Jin Lane story, that chapter kind of come to an end for you, and then Pattern really came out next? How did that segue happen?
For us, I think it was interesting. It was a many-year journey to make that decision. And I think often when people think of Jin Lane, they remember where we got to, but not where we started, and that there was so many years of hard work and being scrappy and trying to crack the code, that by the end it was this amazing success story, but it had taken us a lot of work to get there. And so the idea of then us saying, well, maybe we're going to start over, honestly, it was pretty petrifying. It was like a combination, I'd say, of exhilarating and petrifying all at once. I think for us, though, it was really, in having worked with these entrepreneurs, one of our philosophies had always been, when we were picking a client, bet on the jockey, not the horse. And so essentially we, were saying, like, bet on the entrepreneur. Because whenever we'd seen kind of different clients come to us, we'd seen them kind of bring us these business ideas that looked great on paper, but they didn't have like the heart and soul of like a true belief from the founders. And so we had always kind of known that we wanted to build something beyond an agency for ourselves, but we said, no, we're waiting until we have the idea that is that kind of idea that we just know we have to be the people to bring into existence. It's something where we waited very patiently. Actually, the name Pattern as a concept has been around since 2013. We didn't end up, fundraising and having, the idea for what Pattern would become, today until 2018, and didn't launch till 2019. So it was a many-year kind of journey to really uncover what felt authentic to us. And really it was, this moment though, where we said, well, if we're going to do this, we're going to jump both feet in. It was, definitely something that felt like we could be walking off a cliff a little bit. And for me, there was another component where my visa was actually tied to my work. So I also was like, oh my gosh, like, what am I doing here? It was, not just kind of a career, it was my entire life in the US on the line.
Wow.
But honestly, we knew we needed to do it. I think for us, we'd seen so firsthand the immense success that direct to consumer businesses could have, but also where some of the hard parts were, which was really how do you scale profitably? And so for us with Pattern, we said, what about if we have a one team, one cap table model? And by that, we mean everyone is a Pattern employee, but we have multiple brands that live within this. Like we've got a family of brands, as we call it. And that really, then set the scene for us saying, well, what are we most passionate about? And for us, our mission at Pattern and the unification of the brands is really enjoying daily life. So for us, we said, it's those micro moments of your day that so often just go unnoticed. Having a cup of tea or coffee out of a beautiful teacup, or, stepping out the shower and wrapping yourself in a towel. But it's those moments that if you can make them just a little bit better, you're actually improving your entire life, because it's those moments that make up a life lived well. And that was for us just something that we felt it was authentic to us. It was the stage of life we were in, and we were like, we need to do this. And so we closed our agency down in full, took the team with us, and co-founded Pattern. I think in the moments where stuff is scary, one of my favorite sayings has always been just, like, you got to choose growth even when it's uncomfortable. And like, that is the thing where it's like, change can be scary, but I just say to myself, I'm just like, choose growth. And I think for us as a co-founding team, we set that to ourselves, and, 6, nearly 7 years later, we're very glad that we did.
I mean, it was a big decision to go from, you have the successful branding like agency, and like to take that and just shut it down and go all the way on something else.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think sometimes you have to be a little bit crazy. You have to have conviction in it. But I think for us, again, I think when I go back to like, what did we pick in an entrepreneur when we were going to the kind of bet on the jockey, not the horse? It was just that they had such a passion and grit and conviction that they needed to bring this to life. It was one of those things where it wasn't almost an option for them to not do it. And I think that honestly, we felt the same. It was like we had this idea where we knew there was no option for us to do anything that wasn't this in some ways. And I think it really was something where we said, let's create something that, others are not yet doing in this way. Let's try and figure out how we operate as a shared services model, across this family of brands. And look, there's been a lot of twists and turns along the way. We started out incubating brands and then actually moved into acquiring brands because COVID happened and we couldn't travel internationally anymore, so we couldn't incubate the products as easily by really walking the factory floors. And, again, I think it's just sometimes constraints breed creativity. And as an entrepreneur, I also think you need to be like very clear on that end goal, but you also need to be pretty flexible in how you get there, because it is going to be, a journey that's full of plot twists. But it was something that I think, yeah, we had that conviction. We knew we were willing to put everything on the line, and we did, and we jumped,
And you've also become this like really master of like D2C. Like, what are some of the techniques that you've picked up along the way that have like enabled you to really launch these brands and get a lot of great online just traction?
I mean, thank you for saying a master of D2C. At its core, I also am just like, as a human, I think we all need to be curious and stay learning. So I feel like for me, I'm always wanting to just learn more. But I think when you think about D2C, and not everything should be a D2C brand, I think that's important to say up front. But the power of D2C, or as I like to call it, direct with consumer, so I actually say DWC, is the fact that you can build this two-way relationship, right? And I think that is just so impactful and so wonderful. And so it all starts with, the brand and the product that you're building. So again, you can't have a great brand and a terrible product, because that's not going to work. You can't have a terrible product and no brand, because that will have short-term success, but won't necessarily have the longevity to kind of go the test of time. And so I think you need to start with those two things and create a brand that feels human, as we were talking about before. I think you need a product that really solves a problem and has a clear differentiator and value proposition. Again, I think this is something where this isn't about just kind of white labeling. It's saying, how am I solving a need and making, in our case, life better for our customer? And we really try and, get in their shoes. It's good in some ways because I am that customer. Um, I think those two things were really important. I think then as you think about your go-to-market strategy, it's how do you build that kind of virality and excitement without just relying on paid marketing? Because again, I think it's really important that you think about it as this marketing ecosystem where paid marketing, which is, at first going to be Meta and Google for most brands, is such a critical part of your launch, but it can't be the only part of it. And this is where I really think being really smart about how you think about your pre-launch strategy, how you think about really obtaining those customer emails up front so that you can then have a solid first day of launch when you email them, having kind of built the hype on the wait list, really working with organic gifting and influences, working with press, all of these things combined to, I think, build, an ecosystem that can sustain. But I also think it's very important, and too often people don't think about this, is just like the economics of their business. Again, I think that you also need something where you have a really strong gross margin, which then kind of feeds down into your contribution margin too, which is kind of the profit after your marketing expenses, because otherwise you're going to just hit these growth plateaus where it's very hard to continue to grow sustainably if you really don't have the margins to support that.
It's a great point. It definitely is often overlooked, the economics of the business, and people kind of just get excited to put something out there.
It is. And this is where, again, like I think as an entrepreneur, I've met so many different types of entrepreneurs, but I think that it's also be really honest with yourself about what your strengths are, but also where your weaknesses are so that you can also build a support network, whether that's an advisory team, a mentor, again, as you build out your actual team that can really support you so that you're representing all facets of the business, not just the areas that perhaps come more naturally to you.
Definitely agree. What are some of the products that you've launched that have kind of surprised you most, or they had different outcomes maybe you expected? What are some takeaways you've also had from those experiences?
Do you know what's really funny? I would say, I mean, one thing is just how passionate people are about their spatulas. That's been, it's one of our hero products for that brand here, and you wouldn't think that a small silicon object could bring people such passion and joy, but that one is one that people have incredibly strong feelings over. And if you get it right, which we did, ironically, the name of the business is Get It Right. It really it brings like such joy to their face. But I'd say one of our kind of interesting stories is really our entryway rack, which is through our brand Open Spaces, and out of stock right now because we're sold out. But it was a product that was our launch product, but we nearly didn't bring it to market because we are big believers of doing kind of pre-launch testing and smoke testing, right? You kind of run some ads to a landing page, see how kind of the appetite is. You do consumer interviews, focus groups, and essentially customers were saying, I don't know if I'd ever pay money for, an aesthetically focused, shoe rack. And so the data kind of wasn't that compelling, honestly, but this was one of those examples where we were so passionate about it that we were like, let's actually, again, I think data is data and you can use it as a part of kind of your decision making, but it shouldn't be the only thing in your decision making. And so we said, we're going to do it. We're going to kind of stick with our gut. We're going to launch this product when we launch this brand. And it became the hero product for this brand. It has become this thing that has had countless viral moments, celebrity love, professional athlete love. It's like in just so many homes around America. And that, I think, was one of those moments where it proved us right. And sometimes you have to go with your gut, even if perhaps the data, is telling you otherwise. Again, do it mindfully, be smart about it. But if you really believe in something, I think you are the entrepreneur and you have the vision that perhaps your consumer may not yet have.
That's interesting how it played out very differently there
It
than what
really
you were expecting.
did. And now it's countless, knockoffs and whatever of this rack. And It's one of those things where I'm so glad that we stuck to our kind of initial inclination, because it would have been much easier to not. And that would have honestly changed, I think, the trajectory for that brand completely, if we hadn't launched that product.
Why do you think the approach makes sense to have like different brands and just like products like branded very differently instead of having one kind of overarching brand for everything?
I mean, we've thought about it a lot. I think for us, it's also about we see the brands as sibling brands. So they each have very distinctive personalities, but still the same core root DNA. And for us, having a brand based on essentially different categories in your home, bed, bath, kitchen, that has its own personality, that feels really authentic to that environment in your home, that actually feels much better. I think if you were to create something that was just for the home as this kind of macro brand, you wouldn't be able to really bring in some of that nuance um, in the individual settings. Again, in a bathroom setting, perhaps you're going to be a little bit more witty and tongue in cheek, versus in a kitchen, perhaps it's more actually warmth and friendliness and saying, hey, we've got this, because sometimes cooking can be scary. We'll kind of learn together. And I think it allows you to, again, really meet your consumer where they are in their mindset, because again, going back to the concept of direct with consumer, this is really about putting yourself in your consumer's shoes, knowing them in some ways better than they know themselves, and being able to really think about their journey with your brand so that you can flex your personality of the brand and what you offer up to them depending on the touch point that you're interacting with them at. And I think for those reasons, it's why it's so important that this is the family of brands versus one singular brand.
Yeah, it's a good reason. I mean, they also the products are very different, and sometimes they need their own identity behind them. And I think it also provides a nice like quality standpoint. Like there's such a branding around one product. It makes you really feel like this is that product for the category.
I mean, I think so too. I also think if we go back to just from a purely business perspective as well, part of why we started Pattern was because we saw these, direct to consumer brands scaling, very significantly, but having no path to profitability, because essentially it was every customer they were acquiring was costing more and more. And so it was just almost buying their way to revenue growth. And so we're big believers that depending on the brand and the product category, there's different inflection points that are the most profitable inflection point for that brand and business. And that's okay. Again, not every brand needs to be, a 9-figure business. It really should be about finding what is right for that business profile, the category that you're playing in, the consumer that you're targeting, and then, of course, thinking about that consumer experience, as we were saying.
So, what do you want to do now, Suze? Like, what do you aspire to accomplish? What do you want to create? What are your goals?
It's a funny question. I think, again, for me, so much of this is let's just keep going. I really, in some ways, I get a little scared of dreaming, because if I'd forced myself to sit down and plan, I would never be where I am today, because I don't know that I would have been brave enough to dream as big as it's become. And so I'm very excited for, what that future looks like with, our business. It gives me still so much joy every time I see our products in a consumer's home. My neighbors had a package that I saw was branded ours the other day. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So, those things bring me such joy. I think certainly expanding, as we kind of gain there. But for me, also something that brings me a lot of joy and is really, consulting and helping other founders on their entrepreneurial journey. I'm working on a little bit of a passion project right now of writing out some of those learnings, because I know I wish when I had started out that I'd had someone there kind of helping shorten my learning curve so that I, didn't make some of the mistakes that I made. And so I'm hoping that I can do that for others. That's something that is really exciting to me, is the idea of, how can you, help others, and in doing so, hopefully, build something much bigger than yourself.
That's awesome. It's awesome you're doing that and that you want to give back like that. Well, that was all the questions that I had. I appreciate you taking the time and doing this. I think it's amazing that you've been you've been able to build these incredible brands in so many different categories, and time again prove out that you can have success in various different areas that are not the same at all, and that now you want to give that knowledge back and you take the time to do this. So wish you much success and thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.